You are listening to Let's Talk Trio on podcasts. Keep up with the latest episodes by downloading the Podbean app or stream episodes via our social media accounts. Search for Let's Talk Trio on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This episode is sponsored by StudentAccess. StudentAccess, the leader in TRIO software. StudentAccess is an online database solution that allows TRIO programs to track their students' information, connect with students by text messages, streamline the APR, and work from anywhere, all online, with automatic updates for changes from the Department of Education. Their technical support team includes former TRIO staff and has over 50 years of combined experience working with TRIO. Make it easier to focus on your priority, the students. For more information and to request a free demo, visit their website at www.studentaccess.com or call them toll-free at 1-800-801-1232. That website again is www.studentaccess.com or 1-800-801-1232. Be sure to share your favorite episodes on your social media by tapping that share button. This is a great way to support the podcast. Now here's your host, Juan Rivas.
Thank you, Amelia, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, listener, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Trio. This is Season 6, Episode 24. I am your host, Juan Rivas. In today's episode, we have Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley, Director of Research and Assessment within the Office of Student Life at the University of Oregon, and TRIO McNair Alum from the University of New Mexico. Dr. Delgado-Riley is here to share her TRIO journey. So coming up in just a bit, Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley. A heartfelt thanks to our individual supporters, Angelica Vialpando, Rosario Riley, Dr. Ryan Barone, Dr. Jamie Motley, Dr. Jeff Nepute, Angelica Valdez, Felicia Rivera, Eric LaMaster, Jeff Kahlden, and Jaded Electronics. Thank you to our corporate sponsors, TRIOJoblist.com, NOSOTROS Education Center, TheTrioStore.com, powered by Proforma. Visit www.thetriostore.com, your source for TRIO graduation stoles. And StudentAccess. Thank you all so much for your continued support of this podcast. You too can be a sponsor of the podcast. Head on over to Patreon and search for Let's Talk Trio. Choose one of 4 patron levels. You can support this podcast for as little as $1 a month. If you own a business and would like to run an ad on our podcast, send us an email at letstalktrio@gmail.com for details. Become a supporter with a one-time donation to the podcast business PayPal account. Our business handle is @LetsTalkTrio. Your support helps lift TRIO voices. If you would like to nominate a participant, staff, or alumni to be in the podcast, send us an email at letstalktrio@gmail.com. That email again is letstalktrio@gmail.com. Again, a great episode featuring Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley, Director of Research and Assessment in Student Life with the University of Oregon and TRIO McNair Alum from the University of New Mexico. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode.
Hi, TRIO Nation. My guest on the Let's Talk Trio podcast is a graduate of Central New Mexico Community College and a 3-time graduate of the University of New Mexico, receiving her bachelor's in psychology in 2007, Master of Arts in Educational Psychology in 2009, and doctorate in Educational Psychology in 2014. She's an alum of the TRIO Ronald E. McNair undergraduate research program at the University of New Mexico and has served various roles in higher education. She currently serves as the Director of Student Life Assessment and Research for the University of Oregon. In her spare time, my guest enjoys immersing herself in hobbies that reflect her love for creativity, sustainability, and self-sufficiency. She has a passion for baking, cooking, and canning, and often creating homemade goods that celebrate seasonal flavors and farm-fresh ingredients. As a homesteader, she takes pride in living sustainably, growing her own produce, and embracing a hands-on approach for nurturing the land. She also channels her creativity through various crafts, including jewelry making, crochet, and painting. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley.
Thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to be here.
Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley, it is an honor, a true pleasure. We connected over LinkedIn kind of on a whim a little bit. I've followed some of the things that you've done, a lot of the great things that you continue to do, and being a TRIO alum, definitely wanted to have your voice on here on the podcast today.
Awesome. No, I'm excited. I mean, TRIO works, right? So it's
Absolutely.
obviously a program I'm very passionate about.
100%. So how are you doing today? How's everything going?
I'm present, showing up in my most unassimilated, authentic self and the best that I can to kind of slowly get back into things. I've taken quite a bit of personal time off the last month or so, and so slowly kind of getting back into the groove. But I'm here, and I'm just so thankful to be with you, and that it
Likewise.
is December because that means 2025 is right around the corner.
As you said, we are recording this episode right in the middle, or actually right in the beginning of December. How are things looking at the Pacific Northwest?
It's a really great question. Always gloomy and cloudy. However, I'm so lucky that I get to spend a lot of time in New Mexico, where I'm from. And so I'm actually currently in New
Mhm.
Mexico right now, which
Oh,
is
really?
really lovely to be here in December because normally, as soon as winter hits in the PNW, it is gloomy, dark, rainy, and very depressing. And so I've been fortunate to be in New Mexico the last couple of weeks where it's beautiful, sunny, and just the blue skies. I mean, you've got the sun, even if it's
Absolutely.
cold. And I mean, there's been snow, but it's just really nice to see the sunshine. It makes you realize how important sunshine is in your life. And I've just been
Hmm.
very fortunate to temporarily be here for a little bit.
That's awesome. Now, you are no stranger to podcasts. I recently heard an episode of yours where you were featured on the college version two, the season two, episode three of that podcast. In that episode, you really dive into the question of how can a college campus help students succeed? And we will discuss that, right? Student success initiatives and all that and what you're involved in. But I want to ask, how are you liking this podcast format?
Oh, I mean, I'm a fan of podcasts. I think I was one of the first people to listen to Joe Rogan before it was cool. And so
Oh,
I've been
yeah.
kind of a podcast fan. I have my own personal podcast, and then I've been featured on some other ones. And I love the audio narrative space of storytelling. For me, the community I come from, it's really strong with sharing voices and sharing stories and kind of putting that personal touch on things. And what I love about the College Version 2 podcast is one of the key people involved in running that podcast is actually a former mentor of mine that I met about 15 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And he just started doing really cool research on student success because, and I can get more into this with some of the other questions, but I just feel like there was such a deficit-minded model of student success for so many years. Like the onus was put on the students to catch up, to change, to do things differently rather than the onus put on the institution to change. And so what I love
Mhm.
about this podcast format is it's much more centered on what institutions can do to make change and how they can change their structures to better support students of today. And so I'm very passionate about that research that Dr. Ross Markle has been doing over the years. And I've just been so fortunate to be a mentee of his. And now we work together on lots of different things. And anytime he asks me to help him out or come talk about something, I mean, we're meeting anyways. I'm like, you might as well press record because let's go ahead and get into it.
Absolutely. So I was doing my research as I usually do with all my guests, and I learned that you also run a family farm. Kind of it was hinted at on your introduction. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I am very blessed in my life. I did not grow up in an agricultural space. I grew up in the city. However, I have about like grandparent generation farmers. And it's something I've always been interested in from a very early age. Like, how do things grow? How are they produced? And it just so happened that when I met my life partner, that we were both similar, asking similar questions. And we just started with three chickens, and then we started
Wow.
planting ultra door fruit trees. And we just started doing all these things because we love that we could grow our own stuff. And we wanted to raise our kids in an environment where they knew where their food came from because we also wanted to teach them, about the ancestral ways of growing things and how our ancestors lived off the land. And so really it came like a love of wanting pesticide free, knowing where our food comes from, knowing where high quality eggs come from. And it turned into a place where we were like, we can't fit in this little city house. We got to get a farm. And so that's what we went ahead and did about 10 years ago, so a decade
Wow.
now. And it's just turned into this passion project that one day somebody came to the farm we were selling some birds. We had some extra guinea fowl. Someone came to the farm and was like, okay, I want to buy some guinea fowl. And we're like, great. They're like, do you sell eggs? We're like, no. They're like, well, I work for this farm to table restaurant. We could use some more eggs. And so that's kind of how the business
Oh,
side of it started up. And so it's a
nice.
very farm to table, very embedded in the community. And I just love that it's beautiful. There's 250 fruit trees, 300 chickens, 100 Coturnix quail. I've raised goats before, no more goats currently, but it's really just kind of this way to get back to roots, be more
Hmm.
sustainable. And there's so much research that shows if your hands are in the dirt digging and doing things, it releases endorphins of happiness. And
Hmm.
just it's been really nice to raise the kids in this environment and show them, and I feel really proud to have created this farm in the last decade and be where it's at. And, now my stepson has taken over it and he's fully running it.
Wow.
And I do my best when I'm in Oregon. I mean, I have chickens and, garden and all those things and fruit trees, not to the same level that he does on the farm, but he's basically taken it over. So it's almost like a legacy thing now. It's
For
really nice
sure.
to see the kids take ownership in it.
That's amazing. What are some lessons that 2024 has taught you? And what are you looking forward to in 2025?
I love the thoughtfulness of all your questions. They're very like who we
Oh,
are and
thank
where
you.
we come from. So thank you.
Yeah.
Um, as I kind of mentioned earlier, this year has challenged me in a lot of ways, both personally and professionally, losing some people really special and close to me. And it's reminded me of my own strength. So like kind of just thinking about the simple things of like just reminding myself of my strength and resilience through this and like all the battles of going through that. I also have realized that there's a lot of institutional politics that are going to be present no matter what. And so focusing on things you can't control sometimes can take that energy away from you. And so, as someone who works in higher education, I've not that I didn't know this before, but I feel like this year especially, I've really worked a lot on my reframing to focus on what I can control in my role
Mm.
rather than focusing on, senior leaders who I don't really care for or like and saying things I don't like. I really try to focus on how I can show up for my colleagues and for the students that we work with. And then I think just some other things is the courage to take risk. I think I've been so kind of like in my lane, celebrating 16 years earlier this year of working in higher education. I've been kind of very safe in that environment. And now I'm starting to take risk, and trying different things and not being afraid of that.
Hmm.
And that is really liberating in some ways because I think for years I was afraid to speak up. I was afraid to say things because I didn't want to be seen as different.
Hmm.
And now I'm just so comfortable with where that is. And so I've learned like it's okay to, I always say like speaking up is a form of activism.
Oh, for
Especially
sure.
for our marginalized students, sometimes, especially our first gen students. I feel like working in a predominantly white institution like mine that is a lot of higher income students. I feel like I really have to speak up for those first gen and low income students. And so that's been really exciting lesson for me is not to be afraid to do that. And then I think just the thing that I've kind of learned early in my career, but I think now I'm at a space where I'm starting to do it, not just on the local and regional level, but also on the national level, is the power of networking, the power
Hmm.
of like creating these communities of practice. And it's really reminded me how I've gone through a lot of these personal and professional challenges and being able to be vulnerable to go to these communities of practice to this network I have and them showing up for me both personally and professionally. I mean, I've been blown away with the kindness because being vulnerable is not something I was taught growing up, and
Hmm.
so it's been really nice to reflect on some of those lessons. But some things I'm kind of looking forward to is obviously a fresh start in 2024. There's a lot of changes that have happened in my life this year. And so I think it's going to be a good opportunity for me to like, where I'm at, and how, successful I've been in my career now, I can like move forward with taking some other risks and then just continue to grow. We're lifelong learners. Like it's all about, continuing to learn something new that I've always wanted to learn that I haven't made the opportunity to do. As well as I'm going to try to travel more. I feel like I've done a lot of traveling this year to kind of dip my toe in. You know what? I need to take more time off. I
Yeah,
need to prioritize like my
yeah.
life because as an Italian once told me, you Americans, you live to work. We Italians, we work to live. And I think at the point
Wow.
I'm in my life, I'm like, you know what? That is so important. Like I think about on my deathbed, these people I work with aren't going to be there. It's going to be my family. It's going to be my friends. And so trying to spend more time doing more things that matter, I
Hmm.
think is something I'm really looking forward to do in 2025.
That is awesome.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Are you seeking guidance to enhance your TRIO project's effectiveness and success? Look no further. Nosotros Education Center, NEC, is here to empower your TRIO project with expert consulting services. NEC's mission is to promote the effectiveness and impact of TRIO programs. Since 2003, NEC has specialized in providing professional development and in-service staff trainings, allowable cost services, for TRIO projects across the country. The team at NEC, with over 60 years of combined TRIO experience, offers customized workshops and seminars for project staff, compliance assessments, external evaluations, working on and submitting APRs, database customization and training, development of policies and procedures manuals, and project implementation or reorganization services. Additionally, NEC has secured over $774 million in federal funding with a 92% success rate through their live and on-demand proposal workshops, assistance with data collection and review, detailed technical reviews, and comprehensive proposal development services. Join the hundreds of colleges, agencies, and TRIO projects across the country who benefited from NEC's expertise. Nosotros Education Center, your partner in TRIO's project success. Visit their website at nosotros.edu.org. Again, that's nosotrosedu.org.
And now, back to the podcast.
So I'm gonna quickly come back to a theme that you touched on was taking risks. Was just creating your podcast because I want to be able to give you space to also talk about that podcast. Was that also a taking a risk and putting your voice out there?
Yeah, absolutely right. Because one, I don't like the way my voice sounds. I think I've gotten used to
You
it.
sound great.
And thank you. I feel like we're all always our own worst critics in some
That's
ways.
true. So true.
But yeah, like just, being in that audio narrative space sometimes and me not being afraid to say something has really taken a lot out of me, like over the years. And now I'm at a space where I feel very comfortable to do that. And as I said last week in a meeting, what are they going to do? Fire me? Like, let's be honest. Like, and actually, I'd be okay with that. I mean, yes, I need a
Yeah.
job to pay my bills, but like, I'm at the point where if my values are incongruent and you find the need to fire me, then I shouldn't be in this organization. But it's taken me
Mhm.
years to be, build up to that. So taking those risks and speaking up, I think is something that was a little hard to do at first. And now I'm much more comfortable with it. But I recognize that that's a privilege that I've had to hone in and learn over time. It's not something, if you asked me 10 years ago, I think I was very like, oh, not going to ruffle feathers. I'm not going to speak
Yeah,
up
right, right.
there. Maybe I'll just speak here. And I feel like, that's nonsense. We're people, we're humans. We need to show up for each other. And if we believe in something strongly, then do it. Life's too
Absolutely.
short.
So what is the title of your podcast and where can the audience find it?
Yeah. So of course I've been featured on the college version, but my personal podcast is called Farm Chica. It's on any podcast website you can find. And it's really kind of a historical storytelling piece about my homesteading journey and just tips and advice because I think everybody, wants to be sustainable and everybody thinks like you got to get solar panels, you got to get an electric vehicle, and you got to get all the things. Well, those
There's
aren't
that push
always
for that. Yeah.
feasible. Yes, but that's not always feasible. So,
Hmm.
like, what are everyday practices you can do to be more sustainable? What are easy wins? What's a tree you can plant? Because I do believe when you plant a tree, it's not necessarily for your generation, it's for the future generation. And so, just lots of homesteading, storytelling lessons about that. But yeah, Farm Chica. And that's been kind of fun to do. And I have not put out a recent episode, but I feel like you could go back into some of the content and it's still relevant today, personally.
That's
I think
awesome.
it's pretty timeless.
Love that. What is something you accomplished this year, and what are some goals, personal or professional, that you set for yourself for the coming year?
I love this because, again, as I mentioned, like my bravery has really evolved over time. And I look back and I really wish I could talk to my 18-year-old self and be like, stop being so scared. Get over it. Just
Mm-hmm.
go forward. Don't be afraid to be yourself.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I decided a couple of years ago is I have terrible imposter syndrome, even though I've like done my best to overcome that. You know, being a first generation student, a low income student, someone who was from a non-white background, it was really hard to be in the academy, especially someone in my position, because I have a
Mm-hmm.
very technical position around assessment and research. And I think for
Mm-hmm.
years, it was really hard to like prove that I was smart enough to be there. I was smart enough to do the work because it is very technical. But then also I had to communicate it in a way that didn't intimidate other people. So I was like straddling all these different things. And when people had a question or they were criticizing the work,
Mm-hmm.
initially I would take it personally, like, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't code that data right, or I screwed that up.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that's not the case. It's them, not me. And so I've had to grow from that. And so something I vowed to do about 2 years ago is I do really good work. And so I said, I need to get it beyond my institution. I need to start actually doing academic publishing. And as much as I have some issues with some publishing companies and the ethics around how much they charge students, if you look at the literature and you look at who is an author, people who look like me and come from my background aren't heavily included in this work. And so I felt like
Right.
it was my due diligence to the community of first generation low income students to really get my voice out there. And so I've been doing a lot of academic publishing, whether it's textbooks or whether it's edited books from different companies.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of things in the works right now, and I've have some other things that have come out. I've also done some personal stuff, which has been nice to get out. And for me, that's just really trying to advance some of those conversations. I do a lot on culturally responsive assessment, and that's something that I published a chapter on. It came out earlier this year, and it was really nice to see that in print. A
Mm-hmm.
visual model I created is actually now in print for
That's
others to
awesome.
follow.
Yeah.
And that was really cool to me to see, and I'm hoping like, there's a first gen student or a Latina student sees like, oh, this is cool to see that this is the author. I feel really proud of that. So I feel really good about that year's accomplishment. And then it's just some other things that I've had my hands in, mainly volunteer stuff because community
Mm-hmm.
is so important to me.
Yeah.
Is I'm part of the Student Affairs Assessment Leader. It's a national network of volunteers that have come together for almost 16 years now to really support one another who are engaged in student affairs assessment. We do a free 8-week course. We have blogs. We have monthly structured conversations, which are essentially webinars. We just provide a lot of resources for people to do this. And it's just kind of been a group of people getting together. We have bylaws. We have all this really awesome infrastructure, but we weren't an actual entity. And so this year I went ahead and took the plunge as the president. And I said, you know what? I'm thinking about our volunteers 10 years from now. Let's not make this hard for them. So we applied for a nonprofit status with the IRS, and we are so close
Oh, good.
to having that approved. And it's been a lot of bureaucracy, of course, working with the government, but it's really nice to see that like come to fruition because now in the future, we're a nonprofit. We can do fundraising without any problems. We
Mm-hmm.
can accept
Mm-hmm.
money. And it's just so much better for the volunteers and the future board. And so my presidency ends next December, and I'm just really happy that we were able to check that box for the future generation of this organization. So I'd say those would be like I mean, there's some other things, but I feel like those I'm really, really proud of.
Wonderful. What about what's coming up for 2025? What are some goals that you have there?
Yeah, so I think you had one of my colleagues on here and a good friend of mine from college is Mercy Herrera.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
Reached
I did.
out.
I did.
Yeah, yeah. She reached out to me about a year ago and was like, "Hey, I'm starting a public charter school in New Mexico. Do you want to help?" And I my degree's in educational psychology. My dissertation was on achievement gaps in
Hmm.
elementary school. And so I was a really integral part to that whole process and helping get the charter going. And I'm kind of serving in a virtual space right now on the governing board, which has been really nice. And so I'm excited that we're opening this high quality, high expectations, literacy rich, inquiry based school in an area that in Albuquerque that really needs it.
Hmm.
And so I was
Hmm.
excited to be part of that process. And then so, just being part of that, seeing it come to fruition and seeing her she's amazing. She's doing
She
incredible
really
work.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm just here to like, hold you up, but you've got it on your own. And like, she's just rocking it out. And then some other things, I finally, I've been doing a little consulting here and there, dabbling it over the years, but I finally actualized and opened my own business called Latina Lens Data Impact, which is all about assessment and strategic planning
Hmm.
consulting. And so I've done a little bit of that and that I'm really excited because I haven't worked on my website yet, but my goal is to get that going and that will help with my traveling too. I'm like, I want to
Absolutely.
travel. I
Yeah.
love doing assessment and strategic planning. I'm a systems person. And so I'm really excited to like bring that to fruition in 2025 as well.
Wonderful. Something that we share in common is that we're both from New Mexico. I don't know if you knew that I'm also from New Mexico. What region of New Mexico are you from? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I know. I swear, wonderful things are grown out of New
Right.
Mexico. I love that it's a hidden gem. Um,
Absolutely.
I, even though people like, let's be honest, like where I'm at, people are like, "Oh, I've been to the old Mexico. How's the new Mexico?" I'm like, "Do y'all not know your basic U.S. geography?" I'm from Albuquerque,
Right on.
but
Awesome.
and that's where I grew up. But my family is a little bit more north of that. So,
Hmm.
like, I actually have some family from Corrales, New Mexico, but also Peña Blanca and a little more north is
So in the
kind of like where my
mountains.
family, yes,
Wow.
high mountain living. I know. That's why
Yeah.
I gotta be near mountains. I can't live in the flatlands. I've learned that about myself. At least in like Oregon, even in Eugene, we're not in the mountains, but you have hills and it's beautiful and you're like 30 minutes from the mountains. So I love that. I need to be near a set of mountains. How
I
about you? I think Eastern.
Yeah, from eastern part of New Mexico. Totally what you've just said about the flatlands. So Clovis, New Mexico, and Portales is where the area I'm from. Nothing but cows, flatland, the high plains. And when I moved out to Colorado, I was like, okay, near mountains, I'm good. No shade to New Mexico at all. Love it. And I know we're gonna get to talking more about New Mexico, but yeah, there are aspects of New Mexico I definitely miss. But what do you miss most about New Mexico?
I know. I'm so fortunate. I get to come to New Mexico so much. I feel
A little
so
bit
privileged,
jealous.
right? I
I'm
know.
a
I'm
little
so
bit jealous.
privileged. And I get to come to Albuquerque, right? So you got the beautiful
Oh,
Sandia Mountains. I
yes.
mean, you get the sunset. So I love my mountains.
You got great
To me, just
views.
yes, the natural beauty, the purples and the colors from the limestone and the granite. I mean, just the beautifulness. And then what I just love is the unique culture of New Mexico. We are so multifaceted and multicultural. Like, when I did my ancestry DNA, I mean, it just kind of shows you when you look at a map on all where my DNA is from, it's from like everywhere. And I just love that New Mexicans are so diverse in that way. And I
Hmm.
think that culture really lives strongly, especially the native culture here. I mean, I just love it. And then, of course, I'm a foodie. Obviously, I went to culinary school, but like the cuisine is like no other. I mean, it's probably not the
Truly.
healthiest, like all that pork and all that, like, cheese and dairy, but there's nothing like the New Mexico chili. I'm sorry. Nothing. Colorado tries to like say they got better
Cosign.
chili. But you all just, let's be honest, Colorado stole the chili seed and then try to grow it in Colorado. So
Let's be
it's the
honest,
same
yes.
thing. Yes. And then just, the community. I
For
mean,
sure.
that's what I love about New Mexico. People don't realize it's kind of like the South. If you've ever been to the South, people can be very open and warm and welcoming. I feel like New Mexico can be like that too. And, come in, eat a meal, let's eat together, let's break bread. And that is
Hmm.
something I
Hmm.
took for granted that being in Oregon, people get a little weird about that.
Hmm.
I'll be honest, I can speak about the weird Oregon people because I'm not an Oregonian. But sometimes like breaking bread or like if you give your neighbor something, they're like, giving you
Like
the side eye,
why?
like, why? But like in New Mexico, people are just, it's just a giving, it's just so different. You can't even
Absolutely.
compare them. And I do miss that. I miss like having neighbors that I could just like walk over and be like, hey, I need to borrow your chainsaw. Or like, they're like, hey, do you have a cup of sugar? Like I don't really have that in Eugene. It's just not quite there.
Yeah. And I hear you, and I totally co-sign on the green chili part. I think when New Mexico and Colorado did the green chili rivalry, I'm like, New Mexico has this down, like hands down, a green chili is superior in New Mexico, absolutely. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's talk about your trio journey because that's what you're on the podcast for. Uh, you have grown up in New Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your family and growing up?
I love this because I feel like, gosh, when did I get? I'm getting so old.
No, not at all.
So in 2007 is when I got my bachelor's. So I'm like just thinking back to like, if you asked me this question then, I would have been like not answering it honestly, right? But I've gotten to the point where I'm comfortable with myself. And
Good.
somebody always asks, like, if you could change your childhood, would you? And I probably should because it wasn't great.
Mm,
Because it's made me who I am. And so kind of my family was all over the place. My mom was mostly a single mom. My dad battled a lot of addiction stuff, so it put a lot of pressure
mm,
on my mom. And she raised three kids by herself. I was the youngest. So I just saw a lot of stuff that like kids just shouldn't have to endure. And so at a young age, I mean, I learned so many independent skills at a young age that I laugh because, my daughter's now 19 and she's finally like independent. But I mean, I
hmm.
was doing all these things when I was like 14 versus like, she didn't have
Wow.
to do that till she was 18. And so it was kind of hard in that way, but I was very fortunate that I had a set of grandparents that were really active in my life. And so my grandpa was very, very wise. He was like that old soul, like almost like the Buddha who always had something like
Mhm.
wise to say when things were tough. And so that taught me a lot about like sacrifice and perseverance and resiliency. And so my grandfather became like I mean, he was incredible. He was my first mentor, the person I learned the most from, and the person that really helped shape a lot of how I show up and approach things because
Mhm.
no matter what crap was happening, my grandpa would come pick me up. He would take me on a drive to their old barrio where they grew up, and he would
Uh-huh.
be like, "This is where we played this game," or this is where we went and jumped in the Rio Grande and swam, and this is where we did this. And he just really had it like so positive, and he
Right.
would just help take my mind off of things and really just be there for me. And that really kind of helped, me see like more positive things instead of the all the bad that was happening. But that was kind of like my foundations, having a single mom struggle. And then, but I also had this grandfather that showed up for me.
Did you have also additional relatives like siblings, cousins that were part of that family dynamic?
Yeah, so I had an older sister and an older brother we kind of, became companions through trauma. Trauma bonding is
Oh,
real.
for sure.
Yeah, it's going through that,
Yeah.
like, having to rely on each other and
Hmm.
be independent, and that was hard to do at a young age. And I know that, I don't want to it wasn't my mom's fault. She was doing her best. She was trying to have a job and pay the bills. But it was really hard, a lot of the things that we had to do really young. Like I think about like when I went to high school, like I was there, I was having to cook, clean, help pay bills. I
Hmm.
was working part-time. And then I was also being a student. And so
Mm,
that was
yeah.
just really
Yeah.
challenging. So when my daughter was in high school, I was like, you be a student. You don't need to
Yes.
do anything else. Focus on school, focus on you, do extracurricular. I feel like a lot of that got impacted because I had this pressure from my family.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your family dynamic? Because I know with every family, you have the traditional older sibling that takes on the parent role almost, the middle child that everybody sees as the rebel, and then the youngest who is typically the spoiled one. What was your family dynamic like?
Funny. I always think how my siblings would answer this question, but you're right about the middle sibling. She rebel. My brother and sister are actually pretty naughty. Like, I'll be
Oh,
honest. Like
really?
they're pretty bad. Both of them, I would say the middle one was more of the rebel, but the older one was pretty bad too. And so they did
Oh,
so
wow.
much crap.
Yeah.
And I think, understanding, I studied human development. I understand the adolescent brain now, but that was their way of coping through everything. And
Mm,
so they were
hmm.
just like, rebelling. And so they got into a lot of trouble. And so my mom, there was a lot of conflict with just that, in addition to everything else.
I can
And
only
so
imagine.
my
Yeah.
mom scared me. My mom would give me that eye, and I was too scared like to get in trouble. So I really was like, I saw what my brother did and I said, "Oh, I don't want to do that." I saw what
Yeah.
my sister did and I didn't want to do that. And so
Yeah.
I was probably actually, even though I was the youngest, I wasn't spoiled, but I was the most obedient of the three. And so I
Really
really, yes, if you
interesting.
could you can believe that. I was like, I joke with my mom today. She'll never say it, but I'm like,
Mm.
I'm your favorite child. I know I am because I've given you the least stress and least heartache of the bunch.
Oh
But yeah,
wow,
so
that's
I
fascinating.
saw a lot of stuff. I mean, I could go on and on about my siblings, bless their heart. They're all
Sure.
doing really well today, but it's just so funny how they were just so bad. And we
Mm.
grew up in a really
Mm.
tough neighborhood, and so like I'm like, how did they survive? Because they were hanging out with all the wrong people,
Uh-huh.
like all the wrong people. I mean, I think a lot of my sister's like friends and boyfriends like all ended up in like jail and for stuff like that. And so fortunately they got through it, but I kind of was the good one. And so despite all that,
Oh, good.
I always try to help my mom around the house. I was always like the kid who was like, "Mom, what do you need? I'll vacuum, for you, or I'll dust." Or, "Hey, you have a potluck at work. I'll cook that for you." And so I was
Wow.
always,
Yeah.
that was kind of the family dynamic. My brother and sister did their own thing, got in trouble, and I was the one who was I really showed up for my mom a lot as a young kid. And it's funny, as an adult, that's not been any different. I'm kind of the one to show up and do stuff
Oh,
for her
that's
still.
amazing. Yeah. And I know that family, it varies from family to family and how it all functions. I just find that fascinating that you being the youngest, you were like, I gotta be there for mom, gotta be there the support one. I see what the other two are doing, don't like what I'm seeing, and you had to be there for support, which is amazing. Is education something your family prioritized or placed a lot of importance in?
Yeah, my mom was huge. I mean, we grew up in an area of Albuquerque that probably wasn't the poorest, but it was pretty low on there. The
Hmm.
academic achievement in the area, not super great. The schools, not super great. But my mom always emphasized doing our homework, going to school. Like, I look back, I laugh about COVID, like when you're sick, don't go to work. Well, my mom was like the worst case scenario. You're sick? How sick are you?
How sick are
Get
you?
up and go to
Oh.
school. You're not missing school.
Oh, wow.
Or if you stayed home sick, it was not like a fun vacation day. Like you had to eat the terrible Lipton soup. You had
Oof.
to drink like the Pedialyte stuff. I was like, oh, I don't want to stay home. That sounds miserable. So my mom was really adamant about attendance and going to school. And she made sure that she never checked our homework, but she just said, "Did you do your homework? Was it done?" And so I felt like from an early age, my mom really wanted us to excel in school.
Hmm.
And my mom made a lot of sacrifices. She obviously couldn't afford, we grew up Catholic and we went to church, but she couldn't afford Catholic school with a single mom, three kids. She just couldn't afford it. But she worked really, really hard to make sure that if, someone was struggling, like my brother struggled in some stuff, that he got tutoring. My sister struggled with some English stuff, and so she got some extra support. And she really worked to make sure that our grades were good. So when we did get the opportunity to go to a private Catholic high school, we all were accepted based on our academic merit. And
Hmm.
because of her income status, we were able to secure some scholarships to do that. And so I really give my mom a lot
Outstanding.
of kudos for making sure that we were academically like sound when we were really young.
That's amazing. What did you feel about school? Were you drawn to it, or was there some resistance when you started?
It's funny. I always think about like how my daughter would answer this question because she's like polar opposite of me. I'm like, "Lord, you gave me this for a reason, didn't you?" Because I was such an easy kid. I was so curious. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to drive my mom bonkers. I'd ask like, "Why is the grass called grass? Like, why do leaves do that? Like,
Hmm.
why is it that color? Or why, and she'd be like, "Renee, stop asking." Like, I don't know. I'm like, so I was very fascinated by the world and I was just like really curious. So I love school because I felt like I was always learning something new. And I love going to the library because I love checking out a new book and like learning something. And I was always really gravitating towards like nonfiction and like real things in the world because I really wanted to see that. So
Hmm.
I was very fortunate that I read a lot of books as a kid. I would go to the library every day after school before, I went home and I
Hmm.
would check out like 3 or 4 books and I would stay up late with like I was the kid with the flashlight just trying to read through them because I wanted, to learn about something next. My mom, I was the happiest kid in the world as a third grader when my mom bought me the new set of the encyclopedia books. I mean,
Hmm.
I was a nerd, I'll be honest, but it was okay.
Yeah.
But it came easy for me, I think, because I was so excited about it that even when I was struggling with something, I would do like work through it or I would try to figure it out or I was persistent, And so for me it came really easy. And
Hmm.
even though I had the craziness at home, I felt like it was going really good at school. And so I found kind of my success in that world. And that was kind of like my solace to like, get through. Like if something crappy was happening at home, I knew I can go to school the next day because we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. I love like science fair. Oh my gosh. I got so excited about the science fair starting in elementary school. Or I don't know if you went to a school, but I remember my elementary school, they used to do this egg project where they would go to the top of the gymnasium and
Oh
you had
yeah, I
to
remember those. Yeah.
engineer a contraption where your egg wouldn't break.
Hmm.
And I remember like working so hard on that because I'm like, I don't want my egg to break. Like I want it to
Wow.
like fall to the floor. And, I was so interested in stuff like that. So I love school as a
That's
kid.
fascinating. That is awesome. Talk about your early years in education, like elementary to middle school. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, like I loved reading. So I was always reading and learning. And that became like a huge component to me as I took pride. I always think about like the household I grew up in. Like my mom never read, her
Mhm.
academic English didn't exist, but I had books. And I was fortunate I could check some out from the library. We also went to the local public library. And then when my mom would get a little bit of extra money, she would buy a book. And I remember I had this like really ghetto bookshelf, but I was so proud to put a book on everyone. So that was me in
Absolutely. Yeah.
elementary school, just excited about my next book. And so really I was kind of like on my own. Like I said, my mom asked us if we did homework, but she never like actively helped us because I don't think she actually knew how to. But what I loved about that is I was always asking curious questions that even though I drove my mom crazy, my teachers were excited that I was asking those questions. So I had a
Yeah.
lot of really good teachers in elementary school that would be like, "Hey, Renee, if you want to stay after, let's talk about that question you had." And I think even though I felt like that was punitive sometimes, I just felt like, oh, I get to talk to the teacher about this problem and I get to learn more. And that really instilled in me early on my appreciation of asking questions and curiosity.
Hmm.
And I think I just started to excel in different areas, specifically, like I think back to middle school.
Hmm.
It's funny. I called myself I look back now and I was like, I'm such a nerd. But you know what? I was actually in like the popular group, if you can believe it. But a lot of my math teachers started recognizing that I was like, I don't know, for me, math just comes easy. I just see trends and I see patterns and my brain just works that way.
Yeah.
And so early on, I was getting really into math to the
Hmm.
point where I was really advanced. And so some of my teachers were creating separate curriculum for me as I was learning. I even got pulled out of class in middle school to learn like a special curriculum because
Oh
I was,
wow.
really like fascinated. I mean, I was using graphing calculators in seventh
Hmm.
grade because I was so in tune. So I joined this program called Math Counts, and this sounds so dorky, but like after school, which is probably better than in the neighborhood I grew up in, this probably kept me out of trouble, is after school I would go and we would solve word problems.
Oh wow. I mean,
Like,
that is, if it keeps you out of trouble and it keeps you busy, that's awesome.
yeah, so like I was like, again, I was actually in the popular crowd in middle school. And so I remember telling some of these people's, hey, let's join math counts with me. It's really fun. And I think they just wanted to hang out with me. And so we ended up having all these really popular kids join this team and we called ourselves, like mathletes. But I was really proud because by the time I got to eighth grade, we participated in a statewide championship where
Hmm.
we went to this big
Whoa, championship.
auditorium. Yeah. It was so dorky. You go to an auditorium, like
That's
we went
awesome.
to the local college, so the
Uh-huh.
University of New Mexico. We went to their huge lecture class that holds like 1,000 people,
Hmm.
and they give you a paper and a timer, and you have to like solve this problem, and like that's what we did. I mean, we didn't do
Wow.
like we didn't win anything because we didn't, score high enough, but it was still a fun experience to go to the college in the big lecture hall and solve some of these problems as a young kid. And so, yeah, I was such a nerd when it came to math, but I was very fortunate. I had teachers that supported it. And actually, Mrs. Clement, she was my seventh grade pre-algebra teacher. She's the one that started noticing some of the like math in me. And I kept in touch with her all the way up until she passed away. She passed away
Oh,
early in my college years, but
yeah.
we became really good friends. I would call her at least once a year and we would talk through things. And I always think like, gosh, that was a teacher that saw something in me and really helped me build that. And I always think, I do stats today and I love math and I love trends and patterns. And I'm like, it's thanks to, if a teacher didn't see that in me, I always think like, would I have like pursued something like that?
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to the importance of having mentors and someone to guide you, right? Because if they've seen something in you and they're guiding you and pushing you in a direction, that's kind of like they're seeing like you're built for this. You're made for this. Um, did you encounter any challenges or did you feel like you had the support going through each grade level?
I think for me, the academic support was there because I was so in tune with that. I think for me, the challenges I had in grade school and middle school, I'll be honest, were the psychosocial stuff because of my family dynamic, right?
Hmm.
And the stuff that I had experienced, but then I still had to go to school the next day and like deal with that. Or, addiction was really big in my family. So I lost some, key family members really early on. And so I didn't really have that support for that aspect of it. I
Hmm.
had a lot of support for the academic. And so I think for me, I struggled a little bit, especially in middle school. I struggled. I didn't even know what mental health was. And I look back and I was like, oh, I had anxiety. Like, no wonder I was behaving in this way, is that was how my anxiety was manifesting. But I didn't have the people to explain that to me. I didn't have the support to help me navigate that. And so in middle school, my mental, and I internalize everything. I don't externalize. And so I really kind of went through a really dark place when I was in middle school. And looking back, I can reflect now it's because I didn't have the words and the language to process what was happening. And so for me, the psychosocial support was not present. And so there was times, even though I was like the smartest kid in the school, I would, snap at a teacher or like, say something really obnoxious and, what a teenager says. And, I would get in trouble. And so actually, I went to the principal's office quite a bit in middle school because and they didn't know how to discipline me because I was like a straight A student, honor roll, like in all these extracurricular things, but yet I was kind of being a jerk about certain things. And so it was really hard for them to punish the attitude thing. And I
Hmm.
don't even think those administrators knew what mental health was either and how to deal with
Hmm.
it. But yeah, I made lots of trips to the principal's office and I got in a lot of trouble. And they always hated putting me in detention because they're like, but she's like she's not failing, she's just being a
Right.
jerk. And so my mom
Oh,
used to get
yeah.
really pissed even though I
Yeah.
was like the good kid. She'd be like, you're going to in school suspension again, like what or detention again. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I told the teacher, if you want to get laid, crawl up a chicken's butt and sit and wait. Like, I was obnoxious. But it was my way of coping. I'm not
Sure,
saying it's
sure.
right and
Yeah.
not saying it's right. I didn't hurt anybody. I was just obnoxious with my words at times. So,
But I think that right, teenagers are at that age where even the good ones are like, I have to display some sort of rebellion, right? And I could totally relate because so in my family it's the inverse. The oldest, me being the oldest, I was super obedient to my parents, followed every single law that they put down. I was like to the T. And then my younger siblings found ways to circumnavigate their little laws and find ways, right? But as I got older, I was like, why am I following all this to the T? Why do I have to be the good one, right? I'm not sure if that was the same process that you had. Like, why do I have to keep following the rules if it doesn't apply to them, it shouldn't apply to me?
Yeah, I think, we just I think as an adolescent, not having the language or anybody to talk through the stuff that
Hmm.
was happening at home and kind of like having to like, put on this facade as I went to school, that was just my way of like being obnoxious and processing. And I
Okay.
look back and I mean, I'm just like that poor teacher, they didn't deserve that. But,
Oh,
I wasn't like that with all the teachers. If the
yeah.
teachers were like patient and like they actually cared, then I wasn't like that. It was only the ones that I felt like didn't care. I was kind of the jerk
Ah,
to. So I can
okay.
look back at all the teachers, like Miss Clemens, I was like such a sweetheart to her.
Yeah.
I would never talk back to her, but the science teacher, he was kind of jerk. I
So
would
you
be
throw it
on
right
him all the
back.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Can,
Terrible.
can, can you tell us if you picked up any extracurricular activities as you went through middle school?
Yeah, so besides like math counts, I
Yes.
just chuckle with that. That's so funny. I was really into drama, not like drama as in life, but like drama club and
Okay.
theater. I had always had a dream to see something on Broadway or a Broadway production, but obviously we didn't have the money growing up, so I never really went to stuff like that. The only things I would see is like, in elementary school, there'd be like a playwright theater that would come and do like a puppet
Oh
show or
yeah,
some
yeah,
type
yeah.
of, theater. I got really interested in that, and one of the teachers was starting in elementary school a theater program, and so I just go after school, and we would just run lines about like small little skits, and I ended up doing a few productions in elementary school, and then when I got to middle school, I got involved in the drama club, and I did similarly, and that kind of followed me all the way to high school. And I actually, for a short moment in my life, I thought I was going to go into acting, and I had a dream I wanted to go to Broadway, except I can't
Oh,
sing for crap. I have a
huh.
terrible voice for singing. I can dance and I can act, but I cannot sing. And I realized to be a successful Broadway star, you have to sing, and I couldn't
Hmm,
do that. So,
I
but yeah,
gotcha.
I got really into theater. I did math counts. And then by the time I got to high school, I got more into community stuff. I was really involved in my church, doing some church youth group stuff in the
Hmm.
community, and involving in some like local events and cultural events and helping with those. And so, yeah.
So talking about high school, can you talk about what those years were like for you? What was the experience like?
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, my mom worked really hard, so our grades were good. And she knew the local high school that our middle school would feed into was really bad.
Mm.
And the fact that my mom saw that, I just look back and I'm so thankful for that. So, kind of give you a schematic of the school. It's cinder block and has no windows. It's literally built
Whoa.
like a prison.
Yeah.
It's like a prison. And then if you don't get to school on time, they lock you out. And so the
Really?
kids
One
are
of
like
those schools?
locked in. Yeah, locked
Wow.
in. You can't see anything. And so my mom knew early on that was not the environment she wanted me to get an education. And so starting with my brother, she made us all go take the test for the local private Catholic high school. It's like an entrance exam, like a standardized test. And
Hmm.
so we all took that test, and based on how we performed, if we met a certain threshold, we would do the summer school. And if we were above that, we would go to the actual school. And for me, I always tell my brother and sister, you all had to go to the summer school. Like I went directly in. I didn't have to go to summer school. But we got a really nice scholarship to go. And so it was basically a private education.
Oh wow.
It was like a college prep school. And so it was awesome. Like academically, I was ready. I was not ready for the other social pieces because I was also going to school. All my schools I went to was like, in an area where everybody was low income. And it was like, this is just, we were all like, working class people. And so when I went to this high school, yeah, there were some other, working class, low income students, but the
Hmm.
majority, I mean, they're getting Mercedes Benz for Christmas.
Oh my
Their
gosh.
parents are doctors and lawyers, and they have
Yeah.
million-dollar homes. And so I wasn't prepared to go to school with people like that. And so it was actually my freshman year was really hard for me. Academically, I could keep up. I graduated 20 in my class. I mean, I was really good academically. It was the
Hmm.
social pieces and being able to fit in and feeling like I have a place here when people are talking about things I know nothing about. And
Hmm.
I just, I remember when my friends would give me a ride home, I'd be like, kind of embarrassed where I lived because it was just a different environment. But I'm glad I went through that because that helped me when I got to college. And I feel like I reflect on that experience even now, living
Hmm.
in the PNW with a bunch of, upper middle class white people has helped me, having to go through that at such a critical time point and having to navigate, high school peers, adolescents are so mean to each other, right?
It
And
can be,
so
right?
so going through that really helped, build some extra resiliency in me. And it gave me a great foundation for education. I don't think I'd be in college if it wasn't for that high school. I think if I would have went to the local high school,
Hmm.
I would have probably graduated because I really like school, but I don't think I would have been ready for college in the way that I was because of this high school.
Absolutely. So, given your experience, giving all the things that's going on, not only in your family dynamic, but also in school, highlighting your accomplishments, highlighting your potential, really, were you thinking about college, or at what point did college enter your mind?
Yeah, I feel like my mom always talked about because my mom didn't go to college. And my grandparents, let's see, my mom barely graduated high school. Actually, she dropped out of high school and then she went back and did it was like an alternative school to get her high school diploma. And I
Hmm.
think both my grandparents maybe dropped out in middle school. My
Mm.
dad didn't go to high school. So, I mean, there were so many dynamics there, but they all said, I remember my grandpa from a very, very early age saying, Mijita, if you don't want to be poor like us, you need to get an education because you'll always have a job that'll pay the bills. You won't be struggling, and no one can take that away from you.
Hmm.
He said, when you die, no one can take your degrees from you. They live with you. So he said, go to college if you can. And my mom kind of said the same thing. And then going to the school, everybody goes to college, right? But they're all going to like all these big wig schools. And
Like
so
Ivy
I
Leagues,
knew
like
that,
Yale and all?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, all the stuff that costs way too much money that lawyers and doctors can afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that I needed to go to college. I knew that I wanted to because I
Hmm.
liked learning. But I knew that it was going to be a challenge because my mom said, look, I've made all these sacrifices for you, but when you turn 18, you're on your own. I'm not helping you with college. I don't even know how to help you with college. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. And so, even though college was there always as a conversation, and I felt like I could, go to college, the financial piece was always kind of the biggest barrier.
Hmm. Dr. Delgado-Riley, I just want to say really quick, I think that's a theme among first generation students is that parents say, we will support you. We will help you cross the finish line of high school. But when it comes to college, we don't know how to navigate those areas and you're kind of on your own. Like we'll learn with you, but we don't have the resources to get you to the next level. And I think that's hard for a lot of parents to admit or to even to come to terms with. Because I know my mom still reflects about like, here's the things we didn't do for you in college. And then I tell her, it was Trio Upward Bound that picked me up in high school and we were able to navigate through the process together. But I think there's still that like heavy burden for a lot of parents to say, I was not able to get you, I got you to the finish line, high school, you're
Yeah.
awesome and great. But to college, that's where kind of the support is there emotionally, but not financially or any other type of support.
Yeah, and it's even like the non-financial pieces, like
Hmm.
just like how to apply for financial aid and, who to talk to about course planning so you're not, taking the wrong courses and talk about
Absolutely.
doing career interest surveys so you know that when you choose, because nobody did that with me. It's like, what are you going to major in? It's like,
Major?
okay, yeah, I'm like, what's a minor? Like, you don't
Yeah,
know any of this
yeah.
stuff. And I feel like I think about my daughter, she's so privileged because me having my degrees, we were able to talk about these things so early on. And that's what I love about college prep programs. And I feel like what I've noticed in higher ed since I've been in higher ed, college prep programs they keep getting cut and cut and cut. And I feel like those
Hmm.
are so foundational because I even remember when I worked at the University of New Mexico for years, we had a pathway to college that started in sixth grade. So
Hmm.
here are the key things you need to do in sixth grade. Here are the key things you should be doing in seventh grade, eighth grade, and so on. And I feel like even though academically I was ready for college, all these other things I was completely clueless about. And so I kind of was like thrown into, kind of a disaster. And then the school I went to was a great school and they talked about college, but
Hmm.
besides like, having a college, the college visit day that came, which doesn't come to your senior year, which personally I think is too late, is I never got to visit colleges. I never got to like do that traditional college visit because my mom didn't know. I didn't get to explore programs. I didn't understand any of that. And the only thing I think my counselor at that school gave me was she encouraged me to go to like all women Catholic colleges. And I feel like she didn't really give me a lot of information.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, well, I got to go somewhere affordable. And at the time, New Mexico had the lottery scholarship. So I'm like, I just always assumed I'll just go to UNM. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's doable,
Yeah.
right? I never even saw anything beyond that.
Well, speaking of where you got your support from for college, who did you seek out to talk about college? Because that guidance, that approach and coaching is super critical. So who did you talk to about college?
Yeah, that's great. So obviously my mom's like, you're on your own, figure it out. And my grandpa's like, get your degree, no one's gonna take it from you, but we don't know how to help you, right? So
Mm,
what was really great for me is being involved in my church youth group is the head like youth director had a college degree. And so I got to talk to him quite a bit. He became an early mentor for me about like navigating those spaces. And also at the time I was working with the city of Albuquerque before and after school programs, like recreation stuff. So I was like a rec leader I played with kids basically and got paid for it,
mhm.
which was really fun. But I did that for a while. And actually, my supervisor had gone to Penn State, which I just was
Oh,
like,
Penn
Penn
State.
State, that's so
Whoa.
cool,
Yeah, yeah.
And so she was giving me a lot of advice early on. And so those were kind of the two people that were like the only two people I knew with a college degree. Besides,
Hmm.
I had some teachers at the school, obviously, they all had degrees, but I didn't really talk to them about that. Also, another person that I talked to for a while was I was part of the Chicanos Unidos group, which is like it's like a student organization for Latino students, and we would celebrate Latino and cultural enrichment events throughout the year in high school. And the teacher that oversaw that, he was also a really great mentor for us to like remind us about things. And so I feel like those three people, because they're like probably the only three people I was close to that I talked to beyond like the traditional things, they were pretty pivotal in helping me like, go to college. You
Yeah.
better go to college. You're like brilliant. Go to college, explore it, have fun, do something you're interested in. But what's interesting is I reflect back on all three of those people, and they all told me to apply to schools outside New Mexico, like go somewhere else. But I think
Mhm.
I was too scared to leave the state at that time, so I didn't apply anywhere else.
I was just about to ask you because you have a ton of, just by your story of middle school and into high school, it sounds like a lot of teachers were very impressed with not only your knowledge and your desire to continue learning. Did you have a list of potential college schools?
No.
No.
Again,
Interesting.
this is that imposter syndrome, right?
Oh,
Like
for sure.
even though
Yeah.
like I was the smartest person in one of the, like I said, 20 of my class. Like I was the top 20 of my class. I knew I was smart. I knew I was capable. I just emotionally and psychologically, I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel like, oh, that's too much money. That's too much to deal with. I don't have the
Mhm.
wherewithal to handle that. I don't know how to connect. That just seems so out of reach. Like I don't have the potential to go there. And so I kind of really talked myself out of it because I just didn't think I was capable. And I did that for a very long time. And that's also why I got all my degrees at one school is because I didn't feel like I could compete at the national level.
Mhm.
And I didn't learn until probably like maybe the last 10 years working at the national level. No, I can compete. And I feel like
Yeah.
it was my fault, that I didn't think so highly enough of myself that I could compete with some of these other peers. I didn't even try, right? I self-selected to just go with the safe option, stay home near family, go to a school. And everyone at my school was like, "Oh, you're going to UNM?" Like, okay.
Mhm.
And I just felt like, oh, well, maybe that's all I'm capable of. But I'm still happy I'm going to college, right? It's kind of
Absolutely.
this terrible, terrible cycle of self-destructive kind of, you know.
And I can only affirm, right? Because so that was a similar experience. And I don't know how far back in on the Let's Talk Trio podcast you've gone, but part of my story is I shared is so yes, I was in Trio Upward Bound. Yes, they exposed us to a variety of colleges, but in my own mindset, I was like, I'm not worthy to be UNM. I'm not worthy to be NMSU. I'm gonna play it safe and go to ENMU. That's like the only college I really want to go to anyway. And so I played it safe. I really tried to just be in a place where I feel like I could succeed. So thank you. I think that's like affirming for me, like, oh yeah, that's I feel that. I totally relate to that.
But it's terrible that we do that to ourselves, right? Because I think about like
So true.
our other first generation students, I can talk about this later, but I'm actually doing a research project right now on the McNair program at the University of Oregon.
Amazing.
And we just did focus groups with 'cause the whole point of the research project is there's a lot of data that goes to the federal government on like, the APRs, the annual performance review that the
Yep.
TRIO programs make you do. But
Hmm.
the data out back to the programs and the impact, I mean, through this audio narrative, personal sharing our stories is data, but it's not synthesized in a way. And so we really wanted to do this very multifaceted, multi-method research study on the McNair program at the University of Oregon for our first generation low-income students. And I just did a focus group about a month and a half ago with the students, and you could see it. Like, I swear, even though these students come from a completely different background than I do, just being that we have the first gen experience, I could see their timidness. They're kind
Hmm.
of, not feeling like they're good enough to be there. And when
Hmm.
we talked about, because they're all getting ready to graduate, what their concerns are, they're just like, I don't know if I can compete. And I'm like, it really took me back to where I was. And I was like, this is really something we need to think about it's not just supporting our first gen students and helping them, academically and, get to whatever career, get through their degrees and support them while they're in the college experience, but we got to build them up. We got to talk about imposter syndrome. We got to talk
Absolutely.
about you are good enough.
Hmm.
Don't change who you are. And I feel like that psychosocial stuff and then the well-being intersections that happen with that, that is something so critical that I don't feel like I really got to help me like, get out of my own way, right? Because I
Absolutely.
self-limited myself. I can look back now and say, well, that was my fault
Hmm.
because I let these external things influence the way that I saw myself.
Hmm. And I think you're absolutely right that there's got to be ways where universities, colleges, institutions ha- play a role in lifting this self-doubt, lifting these barriers that we still identify in higher education. My next question for you was going to be, who are the folks that served as your mentors and guides into post-secondary education? Because it can be really tough to navigate.
Yeah, and talk about self-destructive behavior. I became a parent really young, right? Like I was
Mm.
19 when I got pregnant, and so that kind of threw me for a loop. Um,
Different experience, absolutely, yeah.
yeah, talk about, well, I just felt like I had to grow up so quickly. And so when that happened, it was like, well, of course this would happen. Like, I have to grow
Mm.
up really quickly. But I did get involved. So as I was telling you, I was working as a rec leader off campus before and after school programming because I really wanted to be like a therapist for children who came from some of these tougher backgrounds, reflecting on my own experience going through it. I really wanted to help them through that. So that was like my career goal. And I just felt though like working off campus and then going to campus, I never really connected on campus. I was literally going to class. I was leaving, going to work. I didn't really connect on campus. And I started to research and do some, because I've always loved research. I found a program for students who are first generation and low income. It wasn't a TRIO program, but it was called the College Enrichment Program.
Oh, CEP,
So,
yeah.
yeah, STEP. And so I got involved in that. And part of being involved in that as a freshman is you take classes with other peers like you. You have like a family unit, and there's a lot of peer mentoring involved. And they had exposed you, connected you to other resources on campus to say, hey, there's this program or this. Well, one of the programs happened to be El Centro de la Raza, which is for Latino students to connect. And so I started going there. was like, okay, before I go hop on the shuttle to go to work, I'm gonna go like just study here.
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
started going there, and then they're like, oh, we're hiring. And I'm like, maybe I should apply for this job so I don't have to like work off campus. And this is better, because it'll be easier than me, spending all this money on gas going to this other side of town, as a
Hmm.
single parent. And so being there in that space, I got to meet some really awesome peers. But the director at the time, her name's Veronica Mendez Cruz. She was the most amazing human. She must have saw something in me. I think she must have seen like, either it was make me struggling, but in a different way. And she really
Hmm.
took me under her wing as my mentor, and was kind of like the mom on my campus. And, she had a great story. She was a Latina from like a rural community in New Mexico, went to, Albuquerque away from home and got her degrees. And now she's working. And I just was really cool to see her. Like, I was like, oh, you can have a job? Like, this can actually be a career. You can like work on a university campus and support other students and be a mentor. And so she became really kind of my mom, my home away from home, and then a couple of the other advisors there. But that was kind of the person that I would go to. And actually, she is so amazing. She's been retired since 2013, but she's still someone that will message me. I just went through some personal stuff recently, and she called me up. She's like, "When are you going to be in town? I'm gonna go pick you up and we're gonna go eat and share a meal together. And we don't have to talk about anything, but I
Yeah.
just want to be there and show up for you." And I was so privileged to have met her so young. And she kind of helped me through a lot of hardships early in my life and as I was navigating college. Because again, academics were not a problem for me. It was all the personal, psychosocial stuff that I was dealing with in my personal life. And she was kind of that person to kind of help me, like, don't drop out. Like, come
Yeah.
on, you can do it. You bring the baby to here. I'll watch her for you, And that was amazing. That was
Absolutely.
incredible.
I can only imagine the feeling that you had entering the University of New Mexico, first generation Latina, heading into classes. How did that feel for you setting foot on campus at UNM?
Intimidating, right? Because even though I was like smart, 20 in my class,
Yeah.
I just, for me personally, as a first gen student, and this is something that I've like worked on, is again, I grew up in an environment where people spoke differently. They didn't speak academic English. My vernacular was different. And so when I'm hearing these professors, talk a certain way, I'm not understanding some of the words. And I'm really smart, and I'm not understanding things. I'm not connecting on some of the stories. And so even though academically I was keeping up, I just felt so disconnected. I didn't feel like
Hmm.
I belonged. I just felt like these people are I was just like, oh my God, these are some of the people I went to high school with. They're so privileged. They have everything given to them in life. They don't know what struggle and adversity is. And so that is what I experienced my freshman year.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for SEP and El Centro, I think I would have been like, when I got pregnant, like a year later, I've been like, peace out, y'all. Like, I don't need a college degree. I can do
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was probably the area that really I struggled with, is the sense of belonging, feeling like I have a place in the academy because I didn't feel like I did. And even though I was a really good writer early on, because I was academically pretty set, is I still just was like, ooh, I don't want to, how do I write about this? Like, this is something I'm so disconnected. It just felt very disconnected for me. So I felt like I was going through the motions of like
Hmm.
going to class, doing the work, getting the grades, but I did not feel any passion my first year of college with anything I was doing, because it just felt very disjointed for me and very disconnected. And then when I go to advisors, they'd be like, "Oh, everybody chooses psychology. You should probably choose a different major because you're probably going to pick another major and then you're not going to graduate in 4 years." And
Hmm.
it just wasn't very like human oriented. And it was very deficit oriented. Like, I still remember going to new student orientation. They're like, one, two, three, four, all four of you will drop out by, next fall. And
Wow.
that's just the way it goes. Or like when you go to those big intro classes, they'll be like, you know, 15% of you will not pass this class, or, this will be the average quiz rate for this. And it was very deficit oriented. So I did struggle my freshman year from that point, is like, what's the point of this? Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't feel like there's any point.
Hmm. So you mentioned psychology because that's the program you decided uh, to major in and explore. Why did you choose that program?
Because my family.
Your family. Is that how psychologists get
My
their
family
experience
died.
in,
Yeah,
in psychology?
truly. I think I read once, like most therapists like have the most like, like challenges mental health wise. I think I was just curious. I was like, why do people choose to do that? Or like, why do people behave in this way? Like, what makes them tick? And I was just so fascinated with that. I took a psychology class in high school and I loved it. I loved learning about the brain and
Mhm.
how people make decisions and how people develop. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And then I was working with these children who are struggling doing before and after school recreation with them. And I actually worked in the worst part of Albuquerque. It was called the War Zone, which is terrible that it was
War
called
zone.
that.
Whoa.
But
Sounds
yeah, it
intense.
was called the War Zone. They now call it the International District, but unfortunately, it hasn't changed. Lots
Hmm.
of addiction, lots of stuff, lots of violence, lots of gangs. I mean, we had drive-by shootings all the time. We were on lockdown. I can't tell you how many times. I worked at this school for my first year and a half of college, and it was really depressing to see the impact on the kids. So I was like, okay, I'm studying psychology. Like, I want to be here for them. I want to be like a sounding board for them. And so that's early on. I was like, I want to be a therapist. So I need to go into psychology. But little did I know that you have to go to grad school. I didn't know anything about like grad school. But at the time, I was like, I want to do psychology because I want to help kids. I want to help kids that are struggling. And so that's why I ultimately chose the majors because I wanted to give back to the community and I wanted to have help kids navigate some of those challenges that I didn't have when I was a kid.
Absolutely. When did you find out about TRIO, the TRIO McNair program?
So at El Centro, one day, I'm meeting with one of the advisors, and Veronica's there, and we're all talking about things, and they're like, "What do you love to do? Like, what's your favorite thing?" And I'm like, "I love research," because I was taking psychology classes, and research is huge in psychology.
Hmm.
And they're like, research? I was like, yeah, this is so cool. And then one of the advisors like, well, did you know, he pulls out a packet, old fashioned. Now everything's online, but this is me long time ago. He gives me a packet. He's like, the Ronald D. McNair program is looking for applications. And I was like, what's the Ronald E. McNair program? He's like, you could do research and they pay you to do research. And I'm like, really?
Wow.
Like I could do what
Yeah.
I'm paying to do in my classes, but on something I want to do and get paid
Hmm.
for it? Sign me up, right? And so I filled out the application, but I was so clueless. Actually, a funny story I have that I tell people now is when I went to my first meeting with the advisor at McNair after I got accepted into the program. She's like, "Well, where are you applying to grad school?" And I like broke down in tears because
Oh
I didn't know what
no.
grad school I didn't
Yeah.
know what graduate school was. I knew there was medical school, I knew law
Hmm.
school, like pharmacy school. I didn't know what grad school was. Like I didn't know what like I saw people with like a PhD and like an I didn't know what that meant. I was so
Hmm.
like and I just broke down in tears and I don't usually cry like that. And she was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know
Wow.
what grad school is." And she was really graceful and amazing through the process, but she explained it to me and it really had to like it did a number on me because I was like, "Oh, this does like grad school preparation too."
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
but that's how I found out about McNair. It was by happenstance through El Centro de
Wow.
Raza, being with the folks talking just about a class I was taking and loving the research. And then they telling me, oh, there's this program and you qualify. You're first generation low income. Like it's
Yeah.
meant for you. And that's how I found out about the McNair program.
That's awesome. What type of guidance or services did you receive through TRIO McNair?
Yeah, a lot of because it was so research focused, like specifically like the graduate school process that I
Hmm.
again didn't know what grad school was. That's kind of funny to look back now, but that's
Yeah.
just where I was. So helping me navigate that process. So just explaining like the whole like letters of intent, how you write your essays, how you even research schools that you're interested in and the programs and then potential career paths as a result of that. Because McNair is really, I just feel like it's so visionary that you have like an undergrad, like in their junior year, telling them in when you finish, you're committing to get your PhD in 10 years. That's like huge, right?
Yeah.
Like incredible high expectations for these students to commit to that at such a young part of your life, in terms of like developing in the academy, not necessarily age, but just like where you're at on that developmental progression. And so for me, I was like, oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, I'll apply to grad school. Uh, and they really helped me do that. They spent a lot of time with us, a lot of one-on-one time. We got a lot of preparation in terms of the graduate record exam, which is not really used anymore, which is kind of funny.
A
Um,
lot of
and
institutions are
then,
ditching it. Yeah.
yeah, which makes me mad because I
Yeah.
wanted to be, when I found out, okay, you got to go to grad school to be a clinician and a therapist, I was
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm applying to the clinical psych program. Like that's what I'm doing. But they told me my GRE score wasn't high enough. And so they wouldn't
Mm.
even look at my application. I'm like, I've done undergraduate research. I've participated in all these labs. I have like, a 4.0 GPA. Like, you're not even going to look at my application. They're like, no, just take it again. I'm like, I'm a single mom
Wow.
and McNair has already helped me enough. They can't help me again take, another exam. And so I
Sure.
ended up not even applying to that program because they made me feel like I wasn't going to even be looked at. But I think they just also help too with the mentorship piece. Like again, I had the early experiences in elementary school talking to teachers and asking questions, but there was something intimidating about somebody with a PhD and
For
talking to
sure.
them
Yeah.
that because they had again, as I said earlier, they had a different language and I wasn't always picking up on what these words meant. I always call them $5 words.
Mhm.
I had maybe $1 words at this point in time. I wasn't in the $5 range, right? And they really helped you. Like they showed you how to look at a CV and see what they're researching, look up their research articles, get a feel for what they're interested in, and then they gave us templates on how to like send them emails, right?
Hmm.
And that was really helpful because that has helped me in my career sometimes when I need to massage some egos and get people to do things. I always think back to those McNair template emails on how you email people with a PhD and
Ah.
how you get to work with them. So they did help me a lot, not just from the career and graduate school prepping planning, but also like how to get mentorship from a PhD, which is very different than the mentorship I was getting at that point in time was with staff members, not from these faculty positions. And so that was really helpful for me to get that early on as an undergrad.
Right on. Do you remember who served as your mentors for TRIO McNair?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm forgetting.
Sorry,
Oh,
didn't mean to put
Dr.
you on the
Light.
spot.
No, no, no. I should have wrote that down. Taking me back, Dr. Christopher Lyons, a sociologist. I was just really fascinated in human behavior and kind of some context. I chose like the hard. I got to go down in history as probably choosing the hardest McNair undergraduate research study. But at the time, there was like a crazy incident with the fraternities and sororities on campus,
I
like
remember that was like a
a
thing.
yeah, hazing and all kinds of
Hmm.
stuff. And
Hmm.
I was like so fascinated that like these peers would do something bad to another peer just because it was part of a club. And so I was so fascinated in that. And so I chose to explore fraternities and sororities,
Hmm.
dating behavior, gender
Oh.
ideology, and like all these very complex. Don't ask why I chose this. So I was like, this is kind of psychological, but more sociology. And so I
Yeah.
kind of just like was looking at all these different people, and I found someone in the social department, but she was a full professor. She's like, I don't have time, but we have this new junior faculty member who would be very interested in working with you because of some of like the group effect stuff that work that he does. And so I started working with him, and I learned so much from him, and he was probably amazing in the sense that he knew I was first gen. And so he wouldn't assume that I knew something. He would always be like, Renee, do you understand what I'm saying when I say this? And I'd be like, I don't. He'd be like, okay, here's a book or here's a research article. You can learn more about that. And he was very gracious with not making me feel like I was dumb. And I really appreciate working with him because I learned so much from him. But I ended up doing original research, doing a full IRB protocol, uh,
Wow.
doing the survey. I had fraternity and sorority members at my poster presentation, like really upset that I was presenting this data because they're like, not everyone's like this. And I'm like, but
Oh
this
yeah,
is my
yeah,
research on
yeah.
150 people. So it was a
Hmm.
really fascinating research project. I look back and I'm like, why did I do that to myself? But I learned a lot, and I
Yeah.
love working with him because he really opened my world to different like to take risks, to not be afraid to ask questions and not be afraid to create your own instrument because something doesn't exist, right? And that was
Yeah.
really kind of fun for me to do at such a young age.
Wow. Do you have a favorite memory of the TRIO McNair program? Something that stands out for you?
I think the cohort experience. Like, not that I was doing this alone. Obviously, I was meeting with the advisors, I was working with my faculty mentor, but being
Hmm.
in community with the other students who were going through the same thing. They're all doing their research projects. And I really look back on that summer, even though we had to be up super early and like we were there all day, on seminars and working, it was really nice to meet all these people. And that's where I met Mercy, and then we thick as
Awesome.
thieves
Yeah.
connected. And there's actually quite a bit of people in that cohort that I'm still connected to. And to me, that being in community,
Hmm.
the peer support, those are just all those memories collective. Like even when we went and did our retreat, we went to this like mountain cabin, and just the funniness of us connecting and doing team building. And then even just in the class when like we don't understand something or someone's trying to practice their presentation and they mess up, we like help them through. We're like, yeah, you can do it. And that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that whole experience. The community piece, I think, was one of my favorite memories of being in TRIO McNair.
As graduation neared for UNM, did you have an idea of what your career would look like?
Well, they kind of shot down my whole experience of being a therapist because
Ah,
they told me
yeah.
my
Yeah.
GRE wasn't good enough. And I found that out really late. And so
Mm.
I was so crushed. I remember leaving the psychology building thinking, again, I'm not good enough. I I've done all the right things. I've worked my butt off. I
Mhm.
got involved in this program. I've done this really hard research, and I'm not good enough. Maybe this isn't for me. And so, true to myself, I like to take a walk when I'm not feeling great to clear my mind. It's just kind of something I've always done. I'm walking around campus and I passed the education building and I saw educational psychology. No idea what educational psychology was. So when I got back to the computer, I started to do some research to find out what ed psych was. And I mean, this is late. This is like probably January of my senior year, right? Like graduation's coming up, and I have no idea where I'm going to apply to school because I was just told this isn't going to work for you.
Yeah.
And I kind of was starting to look into it and had the education piece. I was really fascinated about school systems. And so at the very last minute, I pulled everything together and I applied to that program. So by the time I was graduating, I knew that I was going to go to grad school.
Okay.
Didn't know I didn't know how I was going to pay for it.
Mm.
I didn't know if I was going to work, what was going to happen, but I knew that I was going to grad school. So late this was like at the ninth hour, getting everything together and finally hearing back the decision. Because they didn't give me funding because it's the College of Ed. They're not as well
Mm.
funded as some of the other schools. And so they didn't have enough like graduate fellowships and things for me to do. And so I was like, okay, I accept it, but I don't know how I'm gonna pay for this. And so as I was graduating, I'm like, okay, I'm going to grad school. I know what it is now,
Mhm.
but I have no idea what comes next.
Yeah. So can you talk about, I know that there's a moment of uncertainty, right? With career, grad school, and what's going to happen, but can you talk about what was sure? The moment you graduated from UNM, what did that mean for you and for your family?
It was powerful because I was the first in my family to graduate, college. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
my brother and sister tried college, but they didn't get past, the first year.
Hmm.
And for me, I had experienced so much personal things, not just with my family dynamic, but having my daughter really young and having to go through very toxic relationships very early on and figure out, being a single parent, things like that, and all the I mean, there were just so many things that for me, walking across that stage meant I now have stability for my kid. Like I don't have to struggle. Like she's gonna be fine. And so it meant a lot for me to look at her and be like, you're taken care of.
That's
Like, I don't
amazing.
have to worry about this. And to me, that was a really important for me. And I think it was really important for my family to see that. And they were so proud that I got through all the crap that was thrown at me because they look back and they're like, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. One foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
But for them, they were very proud that I was able to overcome some of those barriers. Again, like I mentioned throughout this whole podcast, it wasn't the academic stuff that was challenging for me. It was all the psychosocial, all the other things. And just, looking at all the students I was working with, I'm like, if I could serve as some type of role model that even when life throws, bricks at you, you can still get up and use them as building blocks to move forward, right? And
Absolutely.
to me, that was powerful for me to not just for myself, but hopefully inspire somebody else. And then
Mhm.
thinking, my daughter, she's good. She's gonna be
That's
fine.
awesome. That's awesome. So you went on to graduate school. Talk about that experience and what motivated you to pursue this master's degree.
Yeah, I was really excited. And then when I got past the graduation, I was like, oh crap, how am I going to pay for this?
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about student loans. I was very fortunate as an undergrad, being low income. I had some Pell Grants and then I had the lottery scholarship in New Mexico, which is super generous. So I didn't really have to go into too much debt as an undergrad. And I got a lot of scholarships, especially when I became a single parent. I could apply for this to pay for books. So when I got to grad school, it was a whole new playing field. And I was really stressed out. And so I reached out to the McNair program and I said, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this, but I really don't want to put this aside while I make more money and save up for this. Please, can you give me options on what I can do? Because I have no idea how to pay for this. And initially, it took them a couple of days to respond, but the director wrote me and said, can you come in for a conversation? I said, sure. So I went to meet with her. She's like, we were so impressed with how you approach your research. We're thinking about getting a grad student to help us evaluate the program. Would you be interested? And I was like, it'll be an assistantship where we'll pay you a stipend, we'll pay for your tuition. And I mean, I was so blown
Wow.
away with the generosity. So that was exciting. So once I got
Yes.
into that, I was good. I was like, okay, I'm going to grad school. Honestly, my master's was a piece of cake. I didn't struggle one bit and I loved it. I loved every moment of classes I took because I was evaluating the McNair program.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when I went into a class that talked about motivation and I had to write a paper on motivation or a research proposal, I wrote it all for the McNair program. Or when I had a class, on statistics and have to look at linear regression, I chose the McNair program. And so I
Wow.
was kind of
Yeah.
killing two birds with one stone, right? I was helping them evaluate the program, but I was using the coursework to help refine that. And so that was a really cool opportunity for me to do. I did that for one semester. And then the associate vice president started seeing that I was doing all this really cool work for the program. And he was like, well, could you do that for some of our other TRIO programs? Could
Oh,
you do that
yeah.
for some of our other student service programs? And so him and I just started having coffee chats about well, how would you evaluate this program? Or what's the impact here? And what do you think? And after a summer of coffee chats, he actually created a professional job for me to do evaluation and research for the
Hmm.
entire division of student affairs to evaluate programs for first generation low income students. And so I was really fortunate that, this one thing led to the other. So it made my master's program really fun because I'm refining everything. I didn't realize I was doing student affairs assessment at this point in time, but that's what I'm doing. And, my master's program went by like that. It was
Wow.
exactly 2 years. And by the time I graduated, I was already, working full time. So I was very, very excited during that time. I was still naive in a lot of ways, but it was really cool to have that autonomy so young that an AVP is like, hey, research whatever you want as long as I can get some type of impact report from you, or I can
Yeah.
get some type of data report on this, do whatever you want. And to me, that was the most fun I had in my career because I had full autonomy over everything I was exploring.
That is awesome. That is so because it sounds like there was really no challenges then in the master's program. So I'm going to kind of reframe this question. is the opportunities that were afforded to you in this master's program was really through connections. How did you foster those connections?
Again, that was because of McNair. Like obviously talking to the McNair director and being vulnerable with her. And, through that time, we developed a really nice, mentorship relationship. And I think she saw opportunity in me and she gave me that. And because of that, she had connections with the AVP. And so she was talking me up. And it really is the power of knowing people, right?
Really?
But I'm very fortunate. I didn't struggle till I got my PhD program, but like those 2 years were like the happiest years of my life. Truly, they really were. I did
Yeah.
some really cool things in the academy, and it really all came down to McNair. I think about her name was Carolina. She was the director, and she just really saw something in me, and she really advocated for me. She always had my back. Even when I started working with her professionally, she's like, I got your back. And she really did. And she is the one who connected me to these other people, which gave me these other opportunities.
That's awesome. Before we talk about your PhD program, I did want to, for the audience, can you tell us what were the major differences between your undergraduate and graduate program?
Graduate school's so much better because you're more focused.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get to, because obviously me being in like a more like scientific research degree, it's much more focused on what you're interested in. So you can really hone in on that passion, right? So like again, like if I took a stats class, I had to like do some statistical analysis. I chose something I'm interested in. And so they let you do that in that program, which was really fun because I don't think a lot of programs are like that. And so I got to make it personalized to what I was interested in, which was so great because that obviously what we know from the research is that helps people learn is when you can apply it to something you're interested in, you're
Mhm.
more likely to be motivated and engaged in it and learn more about it. So that from like a student learning perspective, that was really powerful. And because it being more focused, it's you're not taking all the I just feel like undergrad, I get the core, I get the liberal arts foundation, but I just feel like there's so many classes that students cannot see the application to the real world.
Mhm.
And you're paying so much. It's just such a different experience when you get to grad school. At least in my program, it was very much individualized to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to explore those classes. So I just felt like it was this big independent study, which was kind of cool because I got to customize it. And in terms of the academics, if I ever ran into a challenge, I would try to figure it out. But for the most part, it was easier because it was more focused and it wasn't all this extra busy work. Like I feel like undergrad, you did all those ridiculous quizzes and classes and you had like Scantron tests and multiple choice tests. In terms of grad school, that's not what my grad school experience was. It was a lot of seminar classes talking about things, a lot of papers, a lot of research proposals, a lot of presentations. It was very much focused on what you wanted to get out of it versus like take a Scantron and a test to
Yeah.
prove that you can regurgitate it, but it was much more focused on critical thinking and building yourself as a scholar.
It really feels like the master's program is a meeting of the minds, right? It's no longer this undergraduate, very individual experience of I've got to turn in my test, turn in a paper. Now, and then the master's program is reading, like I said, meeting of the minds. Yes, you're writing long research papers, but they have a point or that it's really communicating what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%.
You also went on to pursue your PhD. So those programs, from what I'm hearing and learning, those take up a lot of time, right? Was this a program that was such a little bit more intensive?
Yeah. I always call it institutional hazing is what it
Institutional
is
hazing.
that they get away with, which is terrible, right?
Oh no.
It was hard because I worked full time.
Hmm.
I was working full time,
Uh-huh.
towards the end of my master's, I had a full-time job, 40 hours a week. I was a single parent, had like a small toddler. And then, I decided to go. So I pursued ed psych as my master's and I loved it. Again, these 2 years of my life were so amazing that I was like, of course I'm going to do the PhD program. Why
Hmm.
not? This is
Hmm.
awesome. I get to like get a PhD in this now. I was part of McNair. They said you had to get a PhD. Everything's aligning. This is great. So I applied
Yeah.
to the PhD program. I had no idea how intense it would be. I the first mentor I worked with tragically passed away.
Oh no.
So that was a lot of trauma, because she
Hmm.
was amazing, amazing. I worked with her for 2 semesters, incredible human being. We were doing such good work, and then she passes away,
Hmm.
and they rehire a new person, and that person becomes my kind of person, I guess, dissertation advisor, dissertation chair.
Right, like this advisor.
And it
So
was,
yeah.
I'm not going to say his name, but it was a love-hate relationship.
Mm.
It was very intense. I was not in a cohort program. So most PhDs in education, like mine's a PhD, not an EDD, and even PhDs have cohort programs. I didn't have that. I was the only one that came in when I did, and I was kind of on my own. So that made it really hard not to have like a peer network that I can rely on. And then my advisor, this was his first full-time academic role, and this was his first time like supervising a dissertation student. And so he didn't have a lot of experience. And so I always said I either left his office crying or smiling. There was no
Mhm.
in between. It
Oh,
was
wow.
very bipolar.
Yeah.
So it was very challenging. So I feel like it was never clear. Like it'd be like, okay, you need to get this done by this date, and I would get it done, and then he'd be like, oh, this is crap. I'm not even going to look at it.
Mm.
Or he would like intentionally ignore me and not talk to me about something. And it was like a really there was times where I was like, I don't need a PhD. Like
Mhm.
I got a master's. I'm happy
Mhm.
in my career. I can do it. I don't need a PhD. And I had lots of moments like that through the process. Like the coursework, for the most part was an extension of my master's program. So that was enjoyable. I still got to hone in stuff. I got to take a course and be like, okay, I want to study this. But it was the relationship with my dissertation advisor, and they control everything. They control when you propose your dissertation. They control when you can go forward and actually collect your data. I mean, they control every step of the way,
Mhm.
that it was really crushing,
Mhm.
because I feel like it was 4 years of a lot of uncertainty when I was going to finish, or if I was going to finish, because there was that lack of clarity and just his inability to manage me.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was very hard. Trust me, the Renee's middle school self wanted to come out a bazillion times and be like, you jerk. Like, but I
For
was
sure.
like, that's not how you work with PhD faculty. Like you can't do that.
Mhm.
That's not a way to approach it. And so I really struggled with that. And I would talk to my boss, the AVP, and he had such a different experience in his doctorate program. And it was really hard to go through that. And I still remember when he was getting ready to hood me, he's like, I gave you all that crap because I knew you were smart enough and you were able to get over it and you were resilient enough. It made you a better character. It's
It built
character
your character.
building.
Wow.
I was like,
Wow.
yeah, so it was traumatic on lots of
Sure.
levels. Smartest man, though. I will say he's the smartest man I ever met. And he was very generous. If I didn't have a book, he would give me a book off his shelf. So I do give him credit for that. And I did learn a lot, even though it was a lot of challenges of learning a lot and getting things marked up, or being like, this is just basically, I mean, he didn't say this is crap. He said worse words than that, but he'd be like, come to me when you're actually ready to play, because this is not good enough. And, things like that really ate at my imposter syndrome. But I survived.
Yeah. You made it through.
Even, I did, yes.
Did being in the PhD program change your trajectory for a career? Did that start changing for you, or did you make adjustments?
Yeah, I was kind of at this like crossroads of, I was really passionate about education. So I was like, do I go into like K through 12 education? Do I go into like education policy at the state level? Because I was really interested in systems and changing systems. But as I was going through the PhD program, I realized I really like studying student affairs. I like studying the programs that we have. And I was fortunate at the University of New Mexico being in this position. We had a lot of programs for low income first gen students, not just TRIO. And I just felt very fortunate that I was able to help be part of continuing those programs, because I was part of so many grants to say, hey, this is the data, this is the impact it has. And this is the national data. And these things combined are showing that this works for students. And so I felt like the PhD program was giving me more tools and resources to tell those stories and to be able to show the data impact. And of course, all senior administrators love data. Grant, folks love data. And so I was really starting to hone in that this is where I wanted to be. I wanted to keep studying student affairs.
Mhm.
I wanted to illustrate and demonstrate the impact of these programs so we could have more of them ultimately to support our students, and that it would keep making a difference. And so I realized, because part of PhD programs, people don't tell you, is they want you to become faculty. They want you to go on the tenure track faculty. They like to replicate themselves, right?
Mhm.
They're really good at that. And I think that was some of the challenges with my dissertation chair, was he wanted me to become a faculty member. And
Mhm.
through this process, I was like, no, I want to work in administration. I want to be a staff member. I want to study this.
Mhm.
I have more autonomy. I don't have to focus just on publishing. I can actually do action research and make a difference.
Mhm.
And he was really upset that I wasn't going to go into the faculty world. And so I think that he took offense to that. And so he made it a little bit harder for me. But through that process, I was like, I'm standing up for what I believe in, and this is what I believe in. And I've not left the field since. I mean, I'm still at student affairs for a reason.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're currently in your role at the University of Oregon. Can you tell us a little bit about your position and what you do?
I always
Sorry,
say my 11, no, you're good. I always say my 11-second elevator pitch is I try to understand our college student needs today so we can understand if we're doing the right things
Mhm.
and we're doing things right.
Mhm.
And so everything I do to understand our college students today, I'm trying to share that with my colleagues in real time in a transparent and equitable way so they can make effective decisions and actions to better support our students, because institutions are slow to change. They don't like to change. Uh,
Yeah.
and our students are coming with real barriers and real challenges. We should not put the onus on them to make them change who they are to meet with us. We should change for them. And that to me is a more equitable model. And so a lot of the work we do is very equity centered in our assessment, really highlighting, this method might not work for this group of students because there's only 300 students in our entire 24,000, student body.
Mhm.
We got to focus on it from a different lens. And so I feel like I do a lot of that work, but we have everything from understanding student well-being as students are coming in, as students are with us. We do a lot around basic needs. We've done some really, really cool things on looking at like how students use basic needs services, how we're measuring some of those basic needs, and how students are struggling, especially in the Pacific Northwest, being where the cost of living is really high. Is how are students navigating that? How does that affect their well-being?
Mhm.
We know students who are more food insecure are more stressed. And we know students who are more stressed are more likely to drop out, but we know if they have some type of social support to mitigate that, that helps them. And so sharing kind of stories like that with my colleagues as much as I can so they can use, that tidbit of information is a lot of the work that I do. We also have a lot of stuff on like employee engagement. I do some leadership studies. Again, we're evaluating the McNair program, kind of studying how undergraduate research and cohort programs, communities of practice impact first gen students. So I have a lot of like research projects, but then I also I do a lot of assessment coaching with our colleagues, like, hey, this is the program that you do.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to know? Like, what do you think's working? And let me help you figure out how you can tell your story. And so a lot of what I've been doing lately is more data storytelling. So how can you tell your story of your impact through data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? And so I do a lot of assessment coaching with folks and just kind of helping them shape their whole, like, sharing their impact of their program. And so that's just like a sliver of all the things I do. We have a lot of other, ad hoc projects and things, national surveys that we participate in. But I'm just really honored that my leadership in my division trusts what I do. So they let me set our research agenda. And it's really nice to come in. I came into an organization that didn't have a strong assessment culture. They had people doing it, but it didn't fit with the organization. And so I look back, I've been there over 8 years, and it's just so nice to
Wow.
see my colleagues just so empowered through data and to tell their story and they use what we do. They're always citing us and they'll come to us first. They'll be like, hey, I really want to know this. Do we have something on this? And I'm like, actually, we do here, so I feel like I connect the dots a lot of the times with folks because we don't want to have to do another survey if we don't have to. And if we know that students are, struggling in this area, how can we share that data? And I also meet a lot with the academic side of the house. So I spend a lot of time with faculty and specifically, they're called faculty consultants. So they work to, one of the initiatives our provost has is that teaching is more culturally responsive. And so these faculty consultants actually meet with my team pretty regularly. And we talk about like, hey, this is what we're learning and we're seeing with students. This is kind of their current struggle right now. Here are ways that you can, use that in your classroom. Or, hey, we see a huge uptick in the food pantry visits. Can you add this slide to your PowerPoint to remind students, these are the hours and here are these services. And so it's been really a nice connection to have that faculty piece. And because the faculty, I think, not all of them, but a lot of them at the UO, which I'm really impressed with, are willing to change their pedagogy and their practices to better support students. And that is really cool for me to see because I can't say that I've always had faculty doing that for me. And so I'm like, okay, that's awesome. I'm glad you are focusing on the educator side of what you do.
Absolutely. I think it's important to have folks like you who are in the trenches fighting on behalf of students to really change the culture of an institution. And I love what you said earlier about helping institutions transform their own practices to really help students succeed. And I think that's super important. So just to really quickly touch on that, when institutions talk about student success, retention, attainment, what is something that they usually overlook or have consistently discounted, in your opinion?
I have a lot of opinions about student success. I think we know certain groups of students perform better than others. And I hate saying it that way because I feel like it's a very deficit model, right? But that's how it's presented. If you look at any institutional research website, you're going to see, oh, this group of students, whether it's by race, ethnicity, whether it's income, parental education status, this group of students does like this and this. And I just feel like it's very deficit minded. Okay, we know that there's barriers that students are showing up with, but we need to focus on where are the assets and why. Why are they struggling? Not because of their background. We can't change their background characteristics. They're showing up. Why are we putting that on them? Okay, why the ones that are thriving, why are they thriving? And it's usually related to, again, I use these terms, which are probably overused, psychosocial, well-being. These are the factors. So why are certain groups of students thriving in this environment? Probably because they're part of a TRIO program. Or maybe they found community and sense of belonging in X, Y, and Z. So let's hone into that, explore that, and figure out how we can make that more of an institutional practice as students are arriving, as we can see, hey, the student really needs to be connected to something. So let's empower that student to get connected to the awesome program that we have here. Let's do X, Y, and Z. And so I think some of the times the why students are not doing well, instead of just putting it, oh, you come from this background characteristic, which is very deficit oriented, really focusing on what are students showing up with? What are some of the things that they're challenged with? And how can we build on those strengths that they are bringing to navigate those challenges? And how can we connect them early on? So I'm a huge believer in assessment as students are becoming students, because how else are we supposed to know these things in a systematic way if we're not measuring them? So I'm a huge proponent of having, as students are becoming students, part of the process of being a student is you take some type of assessment or some type of needs-based thing. So then advisors and people can work with the students from a very holistic standpoint, because that's the why. That's the thing you can act upon. You can't act upon the background characteristics. So that's my biggest beef right now with the retention models out there is they're not focusing on like the why behind why certain groups do differently. And the way to change that is to focus on things we can change and more of an assets-based model rather than that deficit model.
I like that. Do you feel like TRIO McNair continues to influence your research?
110%. I mean, I always say I'm a first generation scholar because I am. Like, I didn't, it's hard to explain to my mom what I do today. And, I give her these chapters to read and she's like, this is really dense, but I love you. I support you. So yes, it influences everything I do because I know where I was when I was 18 years old. And even though I had the academic, knowledge, I didn't have the other things that you need to also thrive in the academy. And so those are the things that I'm always so passionate about exploring is and right now career too. Like we want students to pick a career so early on. Well,
Yeah.
that's hard for students who might not know about those careers, but then also how are we measuring that they're developing some of these career competencies that can be transferred to any profession, right? So why aren't we focusing on career development? And measuring that? And specifically, we talk about the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They have very clear competencies that we want college students to gain. So why are we not measuring those more? And why
Mhm.
are we not figuring out programs that, whether it's, self-advocacy and working on imposter syndrome, we should have places in the academy that our students can go to build upon those things and have those conversations. If it's in regard to something else like teamwork, where are the spaces on campus that they can go and grow in those areas? I just feel like that influences me so much thinking about how certain students just don't have that knowledge. And it's not because they're less than, they just haven't been exposed. And that is where the institution needs to facilitate connecting the dots for them to help. Because I just feel like they're such put at a disservice if the institution is not guiding them in that way. And I was very fortunate through SEP, the College Enrichment Program, and through El Centro de la Raza, connecting me to McNair, then which became that connection point, right?
Right.
Is we need more of those programs, whether it's
Mhm.
TRIO or not. We need those programs to connect our first gen students because their families love them, they support them, they'll do whatever to have their back. They just don't have that institutional knowledge, and that's up to us. That's I feel like that's our obligation, even though I don't always work directly with undergrads. Any chance I get, I really remind my colleagues, like, that's our obligation. That is our job. It's everyone's job to
Mhm.
help students connect them along their journey because they may not have that privilege to be in a not, a continuing generation home that might have that institutional knowledge.
Yeah. So if you can believe it or not, we've been almost talking for 2 hours, and amazing. You've been amazing, an amazing guest. So thank you so much for your time. But I'd like to ask, I always ask my guests this question every single opportunity I get is, if you had advice for trio professionals and they were all in one room or they were listening to you virtually, what would you say to them? What advice would you give?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I would have to be something on creating better, pushing back on systems that weren't always created for people that we serve. And so, really being intentional about creating spaces where students can be themselves. As I mentioned earlier on, my unassimilated, authentic self. I think that is so important for students to just be okay with who they are, where they came from, and creating those spaces for them to have that sense of belonging and connection with other people like them. I think that is why TRIO works, is because we create that space. And so that's just my, whether that's through TRIO or other things, just being intentional about making our students feel like they are. It's like the Mr. Rogers, right? I love you just the way you are. And
Oh
I think that
yeah,
is so
yeah.
important, as our
Hmm.
students are showing up, like, how are we showing up for them and reminding them that they are amazing the way they are? Let's help them navigate these challenges together. So creating that sense of belonging, that space, that connection, being intentional about it, because that's so important for the psychosocial. I always think about when we think about college, how many of us reflect on like a class we took?
Hmm.
We're going to reflect on the relationships that we built and the people we connected with. And so thinking about that relational aspect, those would be my words of wisdom.
Awesome. I love it. Before I ask you this next question about TRIO participants, I want to give you the space to do a humble brag because you completed 3 degrees at UNM and you decided to go back to school again to get another degree. Can you briefly talk to us about that? And then we'll lead into the next question.
Yeah, I went to culinary school
Which
because
just
I
blows
was
my mind because like that you went to a PhD and you decided, I'm going to go to school again.
Because I'm a lifelong learner and I'm a glutton for
Absolutely.
punishment, apparently. I'd always wanted to go. I love cooking.
Uh-huh.
As old as I could reach the stove, I was cooking. I was baking. I just having the farm, like growing things. I just wanted to learn. And so for me, I wanted to go to culinary school to see what it was like. And I went to Central New Mexico Community College, which is amazing. Small classes, very affordable, and the teaching was excellent. I got to work with chefs that had worked all over the world, in
Mm.
Paris, in Turkey, in New York, and it was hard. It was
I
like the
bet.
military. It was like boot
Oh my
camp. It's like,
gosh.
yes, chef, no chef.
Uh-huh.
Very intense. But one thing I learned is timing
Mhm.
and efficiency are what really matters in the culinary world. And I have an idea when I retire, and maybe the culinary school will come in handy. But really, I did it for the love of what I wanted to do. And it was really hard to work full time and then go to culinary school at night or like have to like use vacation time because I needed to go do this final exam and cook or bake.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I loved it and it still comes in handy. Like when I host big family dinners or I have an event, I am so fast. And it's because of culinary school. It taught me technique and timing. And I learned so many skill sets. I got connected to so many people. And it was a really amazing experience. I will definitely say I am so grateful I don't work in a kitchen right now because it's hard work. And my daughter actually works in a kitchen, but she loves it, thankfully. But I don't think I would love it. But it was a great experience to go through. And someday when I retire, I do have an idea to open a dessert bar restaurant.
Ooh, that sounds
And
really good.
now that I have that culinary background and then all my connections with the farm to table restaurant, I feel pretty good that that might actually happen someday.
That's wonderful. So now, having said all that, what is something that you would share, like an advice or something you would like to say to TRIO participants who are listening to this podcast, whether they're pre-college, in college, or thinking about a post-undergraduate degree?
Ooh, okay. I think remember your why. Like, why are you here? Why do you want to pursue this degree? Why are you interested in that? Because
Hmm.
that is where your passion is. That's who you are as a human. It's so easy for us to tell people what we do and how we do it, but often we don't talk about our why, which is our core passion. So always remember your why when things are getting rough or things don't seem very clear and things just seem insurmountable that you feel like you can't overcome. Remember your why. Like, why are you showing up? Are you doing this for yourself because you want to learn? Are you doing this because you want to be a role model for others in the community? Are you doing this for a family member? Are you doing this for all of those things? Are you doing this for your child, as I often said in my case? Like, remember your why. That's your core reason for being here. And when things get rough and they don't seem great, reflect back on that. Like, why? And you have every right to be here. So, yeah, remember your why.
Wonderful advice. I love that. What is one word you would use to describe yourself?
I think right now, resilient.
Resilient. And you probably know we use this one word to put it as the title of your podcast episode. What
Hopefully
is
that's a
something?
novel word that
Yeah,
hasn't
oh
been
no, yeah,
used.
absolutely. What is something that you are watching, reading, or listening to, whether it's TV, movies, podcasts, books, music?
Good. I love music, right? I love
Yeah,
music.
music's good. The Spotify Wrap just came out and Apple re did their Apple replay. So
Oh, okay. I'm gonna
yeah.
have to listen to that. I'm very eclectic with my music taste, so I've been listening to a little bit of everything, but like I'm really into Post Malone right now because,
Post
I loved
Malone.
him when he was doing like, like hip hop, R&B, and then
Hmm.
he crossed over to country, and
That's what I
that
heard.
man has an incredible soulful voice. And
Mm,
every time I hear a Post Malone song when I'm having a rough day, he just that soul, you could feel it. Like you could just feel the soul. And that's really awesome for me to listen to right now. So I've been listening to a lot of posts, and then when you get on whether it's Spotify or Apple or something, it starts playing like music, and so like
oh
Chris
yeah.
Stapleton will follow the other soulful. So that's kind of the mode I am in music, which is kind of getting me through some rough spots. And then in terms of books, I'm an audio book person lately or as the old people say, book on tapes kind of stuff. So listening to a book right now called Life Sucks, like how to like take life, and deal with it, focus on what you can control. And also because I'm a history nerd, listening to Hampton Sides, one of my favorite authors. He writes fiction, but it's really nonfiction. Listening to his latest book called Wide Wide Sea about Captain Cook and exploring all the Polynesian Pacific islands. And so interesting to see him describe like the Maui culture, the Fijian culture. And it's so cool to get that cultural perspective of the Polynesian people that I don't know enough about. I visited Hawaii and I got a sense of that, but it's kind of really cool how he kind of gets from like the cultural perspective, how those people, responded to the English. And I really like that. So I've been enjoying that book.
That's awesome. Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It has been a true pleasure speaking with you, hearing about your TRIO journey, which is amazing. Being a single mother and then raising a daughter, and now here you are, University of Oregon. Very awesome. You're doing great things. Again, thank you for giving us a little bit of your time today.
Thank you. Well, just to reemphasize, TRIO really works. I'll say really, but TRIO works. Go Ducks. Ducks are number one right now, so that's really awesome. But feel free to find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I try to post a lot of things there, but LinkedIn, I'm really connected with a lot of networks and pieces, so please reach out to me there. I love meeting people. I love having virtual coffee chats and just, meeting other humans who are TRIO alum and just doing rockin' life. I love it. So thank you.
Are you a participant, alum, or staff of a TRIO program? Do you want your program highlighted? You or your program could be featured in an upcoming episode of Let's Talk TRIO. Get a hold of us by going to our Facebook page or Instagram and send us a direct message. Search for Let's Talk TRIO. We want to get your story to the public.
That was our guest, Dr. Renee Delgado-Riley, Director of Research and Assessment in Student Life from the University of Oregon and TRIO McNair alum from the University of New Mexico. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing your TRIO story. Remember, if you would like to be on the Let's Talk TRIO podcast or know a staff, advocate, participant, or alumni, send us an email at letstalktrio@gmail.com. That email again is letstalktrio@gmail.com. A heartfelt thanks to our individual supporters, Angelica Vialpando, Dr. Jamie Motley, Dr. Ryan Barone, Dr. Jeff Nepute, Angelica Valdez, Rosario Riley, Felicia Rivera, Eric LaMaster, Jeff Kahlden, and Jaded Electronics. Thank you to our corporate sponsors, TRIOJoblist.com, NOSOTROS Education Center, the TRIO Store, powered by Proforma. Visit www.thetriostore.com, your source for TRIO graduation stoles. And StudentAccess. Thank you all so much for your continued support of this podcast. You too can sponsor the Let's Talk TRIO podcast in one of three ways. Become a monthly patron on Patreon. Our base level starts at $1 a month. Become a corporate sponsor by placing an ad on the podcast. Contact us for details. Become a supporter with a one-time donation to the podcast PayPal account. Our business handle is at Let's Talk TRIO. I'd like to take a moment to thank our honorary members of the Let's Talk TRIO podcast, Roderick Chambers, Tony Ho, Scott Kendall, and Susan Cramp. The Let's Talk TRIO podcast team is John Russell, audio engineer, music producer and composer, and post-production editor. Amelia Castaneda, script supervisor, marketing manager, social media manager, and producer. Juan Rivas, executive producer and host. Be sure to follow the Let's Talk TRIO podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. This episode was recorded Thursday, December 5th, 2024. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode.